The Iowa Hawkeyes have found their new head coach. The news might be a great feeling for this struggling Big Ten team, but is a nightmare scenario for Kansas State.
You are Locked On Kansas State, your daily podcast on the Kansas State Wildcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, welcome on into Locked On Kansas State, your daily Kansas State Wildcats podcast. And I thank you for making Locked On Kansas State your first listen every single day. Welcome back to my everydayers. Happy Tuesday to you all. And thank you so much for getting Locked On Kansas State to 700 subscribers on YouTube. We're absolutely cooking there. If you haven't already, click that subscribe. It's free and available anywhere you listen to your podcast and on YouTube every single day. No other place is bringing Kansas State Wildcats coverage to you every single day like we do here on Locked On Kansas State. Before we dig into this interesting topic, we're back to portal chatter on this Tuesday afternoon. Before we dig into that, today's episode is brought to you by the all-new 2025 Nissan Armada. Stay with us for the Armada Team of the Week later in the episode. I'm going to have our buddy from Locked On Cyclones, Nick Marovets, join us in the middle of the segment as we're going to talk some portal chatter here. But really what we're going to dig into is the Iowa Hawkeyes have hired a new head coach. And yes, this is a Kansas State podcast, and stick with me, folks, because it ties together. Them hiring Ben McCollum, the former Drake head coach, moving up from D2 up to the mid-majors and now the Power Four conferences in the Big Ten. Ben McCollum could rain havoc on the Kansas State Wildcats. And I don't mean that on the basketball court officially with 40 minutes of play. I mean, it could absolutely impact the plans, or at least the hopeful plans for us heading into the transfer portal. We're going to dig into why that's could actually happen on this show. We're going to talk some Iowa State, Iowa talk as well. And then we're going to dig into what we're hearing in the portal chatter so far in the basketball window that just opened on Monday. A little quiet, but there's still some rumblings that we need to talk about on this show. But let's dig into it here. Ben McCollum has agreed to the Iowa Hawkeyes deal to make them the next school's head coach. He won 4 Division II national titles at Northwest Missouri State before he led Drake last season in his one only season in the mid-majors with the Drake Bulldogs to 31-4, got to the NCAA tournament in his only season there, got to the round of 32, and fell to a Big 12 team in Texas Tech. I mean, it was a great season. I mean, to me, they beat Mizzou, an SEC school, and it was their second SEC win, I think, of the season as well. I think they beat Vanderbilt earlier in the season. You know, he screamed. To me, when I was filling out my bracket, Drake screamed like a Cinderella story, and it was so easy for me to write their name as beating over Mizzou in the round one. Like, I've said this when I was talking about my bracket. I don't think that there was a lot of upsets in this one, and we noticed that so far. But Drake was easily one, right it all the way. I had them actually beating Texas Tech in my bracket as well. I got wrong on that one. What I will say about this before I dig into why Kansas State is actually going to be truly impacted from this move, I got to give him a shout out because as the Big 10 believer, as the Big 12 believer, I do think that what happened with the West Virginia to Indiana move between their head coach, without even saying goodbye to his players or writing a statement, was shallow. Well, it's a completely different story with Iowa's new head coach, Ben McCollum. He refused to make anything happen during the season, unlike what we're starting to hear from the West Virginia side, where it sounds like there was a lot of ties happening between Indiana and that coach in the middle of the year. Drake's athletic director, Brian Harden, came out and talked about the integrity of McCollum during the coaching change process. He said, quote, "I give Ben a lot of credit for the boundaries he set up in this process. He would not sign the deal until Drake was officially eliminated from the tournament. So it's really cool that he did that." You know, speaking of a mid-major program like Drake, who has seen a lot of success in the past, have gone through so many coaches because they have moved up the ranks. You know, we talk about the former West Virginia coach DeVries, who went to Indiana. He was the coach of Drake just last season before McCollum. And now McCollum is leaving for a Power 4 conference job, Drake is going to find another coach. And I don't think they're going to have a problem with that. They've done a really good job with their basketball program, but they're going to have to find some more players to fill as well, because obviously there's going to be some players leaving in the portal, and probably some of them heading with Ben McCollum to Iowa. That's where the issue comes in for Kansas State. That's the problem right now for why it could really impact the Kansas State Wildcats, because there is a player on the team for the Drake Bulldogs who has yet to officially enter the transfer portal, but I am almost 100% certain that his name will be there. And when his name is listed there, I'm sure On3, sure 24/7, ESPN, whoever names it, when you're looking at the transfer portal rankings, will have him as the number one player in the portal. But Bennett Stirtz of Drake will most likely follow Ben McCollum to Iowa. Now, why does that name sound familiar, if you may be thinking that? Or why is this an impact to Kansas State? Because he's not wearing a lavender or purple jersey right now. And that's because his brothers attended Kansas State. His family is from the Kansas State area. And he has not been shy about talking about his Kansas State ties before some of these tournament games during March Madness. So an excellent basketball player, by the way, as well. 6'4" point guard. I mean, how nice would it be to have a tall point guard in the mix who also can shoot? So it doesn't even have to be a point if you decide to stick and go with a different plan. Was the Mountain Valley Conference Player of the Year this year, averaged 19.2 points per game, 5.7 assists, 4.3 rebounds per game. He played almost 40 minutes a game, 39.4. So basically was on the court the entire time. Longevity was great. And just like McCollum started in D2, and now has turned himself into an NBA prospect, not just a player who could shine at the Power 4 level. He, not only did he win Player of the Year, he won Newcomer of the Year in his conference. He was part of the USBWA All-American honorable mention in his first year in Division I, and helped his team upset number 6 Missouri in the first round of the NCAA tournament. In the second round against Texas Tech, although the team lost, it wasn't because of him. 21 points, 8 assists, 3 rebounds, 9 for 19 from the field, 2 for 6 from 3. I mean, the kid is a national icon now. He's becoming a star before our eyes, and it'd be really nice to see him with Kansas State. Are those ties enough to sever him from Ben McCollum? That's the biggest question. And as I've mentioned on this show just a few days ago, when we talked about how Kansas State has to spend more money in the transfer portal, although they might feel a little gun shy. Maybe they don't, but I know some fans do, about after what happened with Coleman Hawkins, with his number being spurted out of $2 million. Well, that number's probably going to have to triple when it comes to the transfer portal this offseason. According to a source from On3, he asked a random ACC coach. They didn't say the name. It was a anonymous ACC coach, not random. And they said that it is going to cost approximately around $6 million to become a top 25 team, a top 25 program in college basketball next year. $6 million in the transfer portal this offseason. That Coleman Hawkins $2 million is probably going to seem like chump change very soon. So is Kansas State willing to pull out the money to sever the ties between Ben McCollum and Bennett Stirtz? And the Stirtz want to finish his collegiate career, a one who's been so fun to watch build up, but finish it with Jerome Tang. Is he willing to be coached by Jerome Tang instead of somewhere where he's comfortable with Ben McCollum? I'm unfortunately not holding my breath on this one, although I would love to watch Bennett Stirtz play for Kansas State. I find it very hard for him not wanting to go anywhere other than where Ben McCollum was. He followed him up to D2 to mid-majors ranks, and now he'll have an opportunity to play at a Power 4 level with the same coach, a coach that has helped him put on the radar, be on the radar for the NBA draft, most likely next season. So I think Kansas State's got some work to do if that's in their plans, if they even think that they have a shot to do so. I truly hope they're at least picking up the phone and making an attempt, because, as I said, he hasn't been shy at talking about his ties. And why is that? Why is that? So hopefully I'm wrong. Hopefully I get to come on this podcast a couple weeks from now and talk about how Bennett Stirtz is a new Kansas State Wildcat. And who cares about the money that it takes? If he's on the team, that's a complete turnaround. And this team is right back in contention. Very interesting point. I want to get to some more thoughts about this with the Iowa hire with Bennett Stirtz, of course, as well. And then I also want to dig into some latest portal chatter and where Kansas State needs to move, because they have to make some moves during this portal window. But first, before we do that, Nick Marovets stepped by, and we talked a little bit between the Cyclones and between this Hawkeyes. Although Farmageddon is still the best rivalry, there's still one between those in-state schools. We talked about that next, right here on Locked On Kansas State. Well, the Armada Team of the Week is brought to you by our friends at Nissan and the all-new 2025 Nissan Armada. Each week, our Locked On college basketball experts are picking one team that stands apart from the top-seeded stars to the unexpected upsets. These guys showcase the strength and sheer power needed to push their team forward. This week's Armada and clear-cut Team of the Week is the Arkansas Razorbacks. Despite losing their first 5 SEC games, Coach Cal's Hogs fought their way through the most rugged conference in college basketball to not only make the NCAA tournament, to knock off back-to-back national champions and Hall of Fame coaches en route to the Sweet 16. One of those losses was to the Kansas Jayhawks. Oh, dang. They accomplished all of this without their second leading scorer, Boogie Flan, for most of SEC play, and without leading scorer and rebounding Adutero so far in the NCAA tournament. So fantastic. So it's just like it's a clear cut. The Team of the Week is out here ready to conquer for the road ahead with confidence, just like you can with the all-new Nissan Armada or any of the Nissan outstanding vehicles. Take the Nissan Armada, Rogue, or Pathfinder and go find your next big adventure. Shop NissanUSA.com. Nick Marovets, Locked On Cyclones, Christian Rouh, Locked On Kansas State. We are bringing a little crossover action to this episode here because we're both kind of talking the same topic. Obviously, we have some different points of view here, but I think it was a perfect time to come together and have this discussion, Nick. Obviously, Ben McCollum signed with Iowa to become the next head coach of their men's basketball team. I mentioned earlier how I think that it is a big deal for Kansas State. And I think I'll get into that in just a minute because I do think there is some sort of impact, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on it. But first, I think we have to really just address the elephant in the room. Obviously, Iowa State, there is a rivalry there. I don't think it's as good as Farmageddon personally, but there is a rivalry there. Are you worried at all about Ben McCollum in the Hawkeyes?
I am absolutely not worried at all. Really, at the end of the day, my thought process into this goes more into recruiting than it does to actual gameplay, because we all know Iowa is Iowa State's little brother. Okay, nothing's going to change there. It's a Cyclone state. It always has been, always will be, and that's reflected in the last, obviously, football and basketball games. So you can argue with me down in the comments down below. But really, recruiting is where I think this is going to make a bigger kind of splash, kind of noise. And I'm not worried at all, just because of, I'm going to quote Matt Campbell here when talking in, spring kind of football practice media. He said, hey, we've had guys trying to reach out to our players for 4 years and they just keep coming back. And that's what I'm going to reference. Iowa State culture is second to none. Nobody's going anywhere. Obviously, the transfer portal just opened up in Iowa State, seeing some moves early, but generally people that come to Iowa State stick around. And I think that really that speaks volumes. And so, yes, Ben McCollum will probably succeed as an Iowa head coach, but we really won't see each other that often. So I'm more focused on recruiting. And I think in that department, Iowa State has it locked down from any which angle, which I just kind of talked about prior to this.
That's a good point. You won't really see them maybe in the tournament, maybe in a few non-conference games here and there, which I do think non-conference is going to get a little bit more deeper and way more important now that the conference is moving from 20 games to 18 games next season, which I love for the fact I think that's going to be good for the conference, and we can start getting that SEC bias, Big Ten bias and out of the way even more. But let's play devil's advocate just for a minute. Obviously, Ben McCollum has had a great rise to fame starting in D2, heading to Drake last season, had a good run with Drake. It seems like Drake is a nice stepping stone. Hate to say that for that university because they've been so great over the past few years in the tournament. There have been one of those Cinderella stories that you just love to root on for. But now that he is with Iowa, looking at it from a recruiting glasses, Fran McCaffrey, he was there from 2010 until last season.
Yeah.
That was a long time of stagnant type of play from Iowa. They never even made it to the Sweet 16 once during his tenure there. Could Ben McCollum quickly change that? Maybe try and change that narrative? Is that where maybe there's some concerns pop in?
I think that, and you never know exactly, because when TJ Otzelberger took over the Cyclones at 2-22, I don't think a lot of people thought that they'd be winning the Big 12 championship, the Big 12 tournament just a few years later. So I can't say that I know for sure exactly what's going to happen, but I can tell you this much. Iowa, there's an element of uncertainty there. But with Iowa State, you know what you're getting. I mean, every press conference is the same from TJ Otzelberger. You know exactly how they play, how they practice, how they approach every day, every game. And I think there's an element of kind of a security in that, right? You can just kind of cuddle up in your blanket while still being the fierce competitor, just knowing that this is exactly what you're getting yourself into versus rolling the dice on a Ben McCollum. Now, that's not to say that he can't succeed or he won't find that kind of consistency over years, but as it sits right now, if I were in the transfer portal, which I'm thinking about throwing my name in, to be completely honest, just to see what happens.
I heard NAL's good right now.
I know, that's like, do I still have eligibility? I'm making the call. But I do think, if I had to pick between the two, I would lean Iowa State. Now, I do have a question. You mentioned it early. Obviously, the Iowa State connection is very strong, right? Cy-Hawk, is it a Cyclone State? Is it a Hawkeye State? We're not really having those conversations, but they are words that are thrown around. Iowa, Kansas State, not quite in that same conversation. How is Kansas State affected by this hire? And is Ben McCollum the demise of the Wildcats?
Yeah, this could be an issue for Kansas State. Now, first off, I will say for Iowa, I do think it's going to take some time for them to get back to being relevant, especially in the Big Ten Conference. I'm with you on that side.
Back to?
Good call. Good point. Luka Garza's not walking through that door, Nick. He's just not. It's just not happening. So, but who is probably walking through that door, and this is where I think it impacts Kansas State, is Bennett Stirtz is probably going to follow Ben McCollum to Iowa. Now, he hasn't entered the transfer portal as of this conversation between you and I, but you probably see it coming. The writing's kind of on the wall. He left and followed McCollum from D2 to Drake, and then became arguably one of the best players in the nation. If he enters the transfer portal, in my mind, if you look at On3, if you look at 24/7, he probably automatically becomes the number one guy in the transfer portal.
Yeah.
His brothers went to Kansas State. His family's from Manhattan. You think that he would want to come play for Kansas State. Kansas State's not afraid to spend money. Not afraid to do that. Did what Coleman Hawkins last year. According to On3, it's approximately going to cost $6 million this year in the transfer portal if you want to become a top 25 team. That's what an ACC coach, an anonymous coach said heading into this one from On3. Obviously you take that as you will, but with Stirtz having an opportunity to go play at a Power 4 level, in this case would be Iowa, with a familiar coach, I think that could be the demise of missing out for Kansas State. Now, is it still possible? Absolutely. Will he even enter the transfer portal? Very likely, but as of right now, that's not happening. I think he's going to get a bag wherever he goes. Is
Agreed.
The bag a little lower because he gets to go with his coach? Maybe he gets the hometown discount in the eyes of just playing with his coach again? Or can Kansas State wheel him on in? That's what I want to know. But in this eyes, if that happens, if Sturt goes to Iowa, I think there is going to be this weird type of rivalry that becomes between the Hawkeyes and Kansas State. Maybe might not come up to fruition or start seeing it, on ESPN or anything like that. But there's going to be a fan base that always hates Iowa if Sturtz goes with McCollum, because knowing that they could have had an opportunity to get him with the Wildcats.
Well, as much of a rivalry as Farmageddon is, I'm glad we could potentially join forces in the neutral.
Cream of the crop, brother. We got to shake hands like Hogan and Ultimate Warrior.
Yes. That is. No, agreed. Great. Yes. No, I'll ask you. I'm just curious because I haven't dove, deep into Kansas State as much as obviously Iowa State, and Locked On Kansas State is the best place to get your daily Kansas State content. Of course, your team every day. But Iowa seems to be kind of cleaning house. Now, it's not them doing it. It's a lot of players just going into the portal because now you don't have the same head coach and obviously not a ton of success in Iowa City this year. So it kind of seems like at this moment in time, my kind of naivete, to quote Pat McAfee, is leaning towards Bennett Stirtz. Stirtz. I'm just gonna go with that because for some reason I'm stuttering.
Bennett, you're right.
Yeah, Bennett. Okay. Is gonna have a spot on that team. How much playing time would he get with Kansas State?
I mean, first of all, I didn't know you spoke French, so very nice that you're stepping up your eloquence here. Bennett Stirtz would be probably the top player on Kansas State, and I think he's the top player on Iowa next year too, wherever he goes. He was named an honorable mention for AP this year in his first year in Division I. I mean, now if he goes to a Power 4 conference, I don't think that changes. I really don't think that changes. I just would like to see it happen in the Big 12 instead of the Big 10. The only thing that is stopping him from coming to play for Kansas State is the fact that his head coach, the one he's familiar with, now has a Power 4 job. That to me is the only thing that is stopping him potentially not going to Kansas State. I think everything else, the stars align in every which way. Does he want to come play for Coach Tang? And is the money shiny enough? If that's the case, does Manhattan have enough in their pockets to be able to just wheel them on in? Do what is follow the family legacy. Come with
it's really not that far.
Brothers. Exactly. Come where your brothers went to school. Come where your family is from. Finish off your college career with Kansas State. That's what I'm hoping happens, but I'm not holding my breath for it because of Ben McCollum going to a Power 2 school. That's just, it's just the way it is. Unfortunately, that's how I have to say it on this episode. But Stirtz, regardless of the case, is going to be absolutely electric. I will say this as we're wrapping up this little segment. And this is probably going to be the only nod I give to Iowa here. I wouldn't be too worried about the players leaving the portal because that seems kind of like a normal thing these days.
Oh, it's so
almost
common.
Like getting a renegotiation, if you will. Once a coach leaves, some of your top players might put that word out saying, I'm entering the transfer portal, but then you usually see that little asterisk at the end, is willing to return. You've seen that multiple times on social media, I'm sure. It's almost like they want to get a renegotiation, a recommitment from the new coaching staff and the university. Usually that probably means a little bit more money in this NIL world. And then they're right back into this. So in the eyes, and probably for the only little nod I can say for Iowa here, because if you take Stirtz from me, we're going to have some problems, folks. If you do, I think you don't have anything to worry about that, though, with the other players in the portal. A couple of them are probably going to be on their way back, but not all. That's the way of the beast.
That's just the reality that we're living in with the transfer portal and NIL. And I'm going to talk about in just a few seconds. So don't go anywhere. Iowa State's portal activity. And that's going to be something that you got to take with a grain of salt, kind of in the same vein, right? Are we entering the portal to leave? Are we entering the portal to just explore options? That's just the reality of this situation. That is the new age of college sports.
Yeah. Priorities for the transfer portal. That's absolutely next. So check that out right after this break. Get the supplies you need from the site made from the skilled trades. That's SupplyHouse. Whether you're in plumbing, HVAC, or electrical work, SupplyHouse is the reliable way to order products online. Their easy-to-use website is packed with helpful resources, and their latest product info gets you the job done right. Plus, with a complete inventory of over 200,000 parts from 400-plus top brands, you'll find exactly what you need delivered fast from coast to coast. If you need help with an order, well, SupplyHouse offers expert support and industry-leading service, so you'll always talk to a real person. And for trade pros looking for an extra edge, their free Trade Master program offers exclusive perks like a dedicated phone line, free shipping, and discounts on every order. Thousands of skilled professionals are already taking advantage. Well, now it's your turn. So join the Trade Master program today at supplyhouse.com/TM and start ordering plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies with just a few clicks. Plus, if you use promo code SH5 for 5% off your first order, that's supplyhouse.com. And welcome back to Locked On Kansas State. For your second listen of the day, I really appreciate making this your first listen. But for your second listen, check out Locked On College Basketball with Isaac Shiade and Andy Patton. March is here, so become the most informed college basketball fan throughout all of this madness. Sweet 16 is going to be absolutely electric, folks. So find Locked On College Basketball on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. I hope you had a little bit of fun there with Nick Marovets and myself talking, just some fun here. And I like to stir the pot. I really do. And hearing Nick saying that he thinks Iowa is little brother is just a great feeling. I love that. And although that I think personally, and I'll say it again, I think Iowa State and Kansas State, Farmageddon is a much better rivalry than Iowa and Iowa State. I'm the minority as well. I think Farmageddon is a better rivalry than the Sunflower to me, especially in football. But that's a different conversation for a different day. I think we talked much about the whole McCollum situation. I think we kind of killed that one for now. I want to see what happens with Bennett Stirtz, though. I really am excited that maybe we can shock the world and bring him to Manhattan. Hopefully that's the case. But there are a few rumblings still going on for Kansas State in the transfer portal. As of today, as of this recording, this is Monday night. This will be coming out to you on Tuesday. And it's basically Tuesday right now for you. No one for Kansas State has entered the transfer portal. I do expect that to change. I don't know who's going to. But when you don't make the NCAA tournament, you have to have some sort of turnover. You cannot run it back with every single player on the roster. Now, I will add this, that Coach Tang is trying to push this new Houston model that we've talked about in the past, where they do try and bring as much back, they have as much retention as possible, and then retool with their pieces. So if everything works out in the favor of Jerome Tang, not many players will leave in the transfer portal, and they will build this new core, something that they did not have at the beginning of last season, which in my personal opinion is the reason why they started so slow, why they didn't have a good chemistry yet. That'll all change the next season if they have a core throughout the entire offseason. And then these portal pieces that they add are just nice retooling pieces. That's the way that you build a successful team. And you probably don't have to hit that $6 million number that we talked about if you do that. So hopefully that's the case. But there is some news and some rumblings from a couple players that are receiving offers from Kansas State. And one of them is a point guard. And I think this is interesting as well. Chase Forte has become a name that has been popped up with Kansas State's radar. 6'3" guard, currently ranked the 10th overall player in the transfer portal, number 2 overall point guard, according to On3. He's said he's received some offers from Kansas State and a couple other ones as well. He said, quote, "I would say I'm hearing the most consistently right now from USC, Arizona State, Boston College, Wichita State, and Kansas State." So obviously a pretty diverse group of programs there, from the West Coast to other teams in the Big 12, to the East Coast and Boston College, to mid-majors in Wichita State, and of course the team in Manhattan. So, it doesn't really sound like it's a clear cut that Kansas State is a favorite for a guy like Forte, but the fact that they're in it makes you wonder if they are okay with who they have at point guard right now. Obviously, Doug McDaniel had up and down seasons last year. We're still waiting on David Castillo to make that next step forward. Can he do that as a sophomore? We all hope that's the case. But it sounds like they're not going to put all their eggs in one basket. And they have to build depth. And to be honest, having 3 good point guards on a team would be great, would be a fantastic thing to have. And I think you can run that. I think you absolutely can run that if you plan on going 8 or 9 deep throughout a game. Heck, even 10 deep would be great. So Forte's on the map. Pay attention to him. He played for South Dakota last year, mid-major player. Mid-major players are always a really good thing to have if they stepped up and did really good things. Because to me, I think they play with a chip on their shoulder. They want to prove that they can play at the next level. They've done it at the mid-major level. If recruiting staffs feel like they can do that at the next level, they're already playing with that type of mentality where they know they have to be on every single night. So I love it when teams like Kansas State bring in mid-major talent where they always feel like they have something to prove. And I feel like you'd get that with a guy like Chase Forte. There's another guy also I shouldn't say also, always, not always either, but there's another player that is being mentioned as well. And his name is All Right. And the way I make this joke is because his brother's name is Always Right. Yes, I'm not joking. And I think our buddy over at Cats, Joe Tillery, said it's not a nursery rhyme when he's talking about these 2 players. But All Right playing for Valparaiso. I think I said that wrong. Valparaiso. Excuse me. I think I said it wrong the second time as well. But he is going to enter the transfer portal, already has. and there was a lot of interesting things about him. Joe Tipton from On3 put out that he's entering the transfer portal, 6'3" freshman, Mountain Valley Conference Rookie of the Year. So another played in the same conference as Bennett Stirtz, averaged 15.5 points per game this season. Says it will consider a return to Valpo, but examines his options in the portal. So the fact that he's already receiving some options, already talking about potentially Kansas State, could be a interesting piece as well. 6'3" freshman averaging 15.5 points per game is insane. So as you're seeing from some of these players, Bennett Stirtz, you're talking about all right here, these guys can put up numbers and produce. Something that you would hope to need from Kansas State if they look to make that next step forward, because it felt like we didn't always have players that could produce. And there were some issues, especially off the bench as well. When you had certain players in, I'm not going to go and name those right now. I don't think that's the right time and place because I want to see what happens with who's leaving in the portal before I make some of these thought processes here. But some of the players off the bench weren't always the most productive for Kansas State. I think that's a fair thing to say when you don't make the NCAA tournament. I think that's just a fair thing to say. So those are some certain players that right now are on the radar for Kansas State. It's the first day out of the portal. So we're just getting like the bare minimum. And we don't know who's leaving for Kansas State as well. We'll dig more deeper into this as more news grows, but I figured we could end this segment today with just a little bit of rumblings in the portal chatter. And we got to drop that nice graphic that we get to do during football season on this show as well. Love bringing this screen up when we get a chance to talk portal chatter. Gets my hairs rising a little bit as well. All right, we've got a news drop from the football team. Spring practice will officially start April 4th. That's a great feeling. We'll obviously have more coverage on the football squad here in the next week or so. But until then, we got the women's basketball team going to the Sweet 16 this weekend. We're going to talk this men's transfer portal. We got so much more to talk about here this week throughout Locked On Kansas State. So be sure, if you are subscribed, stay subscribed. And if you haven't hit that button yet, now is a perfect time to do so. Every single day, we're bringing you Kansas State Wildcats coverage. But until then, please like the video, please subscribe. And this has been Locked On Kansas State.